And life actually really is simple when we're just present. It really is uncomplicated when we're just present in this particular situation. And that requires letting go to get to that simplicity. And in that simplicity, where there's just the wind on my cheek, or the sound of your voice, or the reflection of light on the bedspread, or the smell of freshly cut grass on a summer's day, what happens is an arising of lovingness. In the simplicity, love arises. In the complexity, which is overthinking, over worrying, over regretting, we're distancing ourselves from our true nature, which is lovingness. So letting go leads to lovingness and simplicity.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney Ann Jenkins. Hello and welcome to the 111th episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This episode, I have with me Tom Cronin. Tom spent 26 years in finance markets as one of Australia's leading bond and swap brokers. He discovered meditation in the early stages of his career, while the anxiety and chaos he was experiencing had hit a crisis point, and it completely transformed his world, both personally and professionally. Founder of the Stillness Project, a global movement to inspire 1 billion people to sit in stillness daily. Tom is passionate about reducing stress and chaos in people's lives. His ongoing work in transformational leadership coaching and corporate training has seen him working with some of the top companies in the world like Amazon, Qantas, UBS, and Coca-Cola. He has spoken on stage at conferences and events like AdNews Summit, A-Fest, Wanderlust, and Mind Heart Connect. Tom has 6 books published, a meditation app, and produced the hit film The Portal. I had a lovely time connecting with Tom, and we were able to talk about some topics that seem simple on the surface, but really actually have a lot of depth to them. And those personally are my favorite types of conversations. So here is the wisdom of Tom Cronin. Enjoy. So the nature of my podcast is about the inner authentic voice or intuition or duende or the daimon or however you would like to describe it, that thing within you that drives you. And because of the nature of what you do and the work that you do, guiding people to listen to this voice within them, you personally had to go through a lot of experiences yourself, probably, to be able to guide someone to do that. So one of the first things that I like to ask my guests is, when is the first time that you can remember realizing that you had this inner voice of your own and you were able to follow it?
It's such a good question. Um, when I started to meditate, which was a deep transcending style of meditation, I do Vedic meditation, otherwise known as transcendental meditation. And this deepening into conscious awareness through my meditation practice started to awaken and help me realize that there was 2 things in my reality. One was my mind, which was just a constant chatter of noise and conditioning and coding and constructs. And then there was consciousness itself, which was the ability to watch the mind from awareness. And it wasn't until I started meditating, particularly in these deeper meditations, that I started to harness and cultivate this watcher. In Sanskrit, we call it the silent witness, Sakshi Kutashta. And the silent witnessing of the mind and your emotions, your actions, was when I really started to reclaim sovereignty, I think, in my life. Because before, there was just this mind that was just this cacophony of noise, and it was riddled with lots of anxiety and negative thoughts and fears and phobias and addictions and all sorts of behavioral patterns. But it wasn't, and that was leading to a lot of pain and suffering, and that caused me to start meditating. But it's when I started meditating that I started to tap into what's already there, and all humans have access to it. But it took me a while to realize that through the meditation.
And how did you find meditation? How did you stumble upon that?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I guess in some ways you could say divinely organized, or you could say random, or synchronized. But I was having a really bleak and dark time in my life. I was experiencing agoraphobia, a lot of depression, panic attacks. So agoraphobia, if anyone doesn't know, it's that inability to leave the house. I had been riddled with these anxiety and panic attack experiences, these waves of panic and anxiety. I had chronic insomnia. I had a lot of drug use, and was pretty reckless and hedonistic and narcissistic and all sorts of things at that time. And that led to a really sort of bleak time in my life. And it was in this time that I was taking time off work. It was back in the 90s. And I was sitting at home because we had no internet, no Netflix, and no phones with, all sorts of social media devices. So I was watching TV, and there was a documentary about a large, very successful property developer in Australia. And I was watching it because I was into success. I was in finance, and I really looked up to this guy who was quite a well recognized property developer, very successful man. And in that documentary, he talked very briefly, only for about 2 minutes, about how he used the word transcendental meditation for his success. And they showed him sitting in a chair while he was in a suit with his eyes closed, just sitting comfortably meditating. And it was like an epiphany for me. It was like a light bulb moment, because I'd never come across meditation. It was one of those things that monks with monasteries and shaved heads do. But there was this businessman in a suit meditating in a chair. So that really was a catalyst for me and I could feel the shift in my body at the time. It was really quite interesting. There was something that sort of came alive and had this incredible lean in and curiosity about it. So that's when I did something very strange for the young people today. I went to the big yellow book that we had in our house that stopped the door from closing in the wind, called the Yellow Pages. I think kids these days call it Google. And I started looking up meditation, and that was the starting point for my journey into meditation and Eastern philosophy and mindfulness.
Wow. Would you mind if we went back to earlier in your life? If you're not comfortable talking about it, it's okay. But I think that sometimes, like how we are raised, or the culture or the environment that we are brought up in, our connection to religion or spirituality, kind of informs things going forward. So what was your relationship with spirituality like when you were growing up?
Yeah, as a kid, I was brought up on a farm in a really beautiful, wholesome environment. There was 5 children, mum and dad. We had a very wholesome upbringing, and we went to mass every week. So we were brought up Catholics, and every room had a crucifix in it with Jesus on it. And I developed a really strong connection with God as a child. And people listening to this that might be atheist or have some discomfort around that word, but for me, there was this deep understanding, and I had a constant communication with this. Now that I look back at it from another level, at the time it was like a personified, individual that was listening to me and responding. These days, I see it more as a universal intelligence, but there was a definite communication that I was having, and it seemed almost two-way. In that, a lot of my prayers, my mum used to be quite amazed because I'd tell her the things that I'd pray for and how they used to manifest, and used to manifest some really funny things, constantly winning school raffles and stuff like that. They used to pray to win, but whether it was just luck or not, who knows? But I did have a very strong. A lot of things that I prayed for would come to fruition, and that reaffirmed the importance of that communication. So every night I had prayer and communication with this other force or intelligence, this divinity. At the time, for me, it was God. So I think that really started to develop and shape my future exploration into spirituality.
And how did that experience inform your introduction to meditation?
It's interesting, when I look at my life, I have that time before I went into finance and became a broker. I had a strong sense of connection with God, and was quite, I guess at the time, religious, if you want to call it that. Went to church and had a strong Catholic faith, going to Catholic schools from primary school and high school, and bring in a family that was very religious. To grace before meals every day. We'd do in Lent, we'd do certain things we'd have to give up for Lent, and we'd do rosary quite often. For those that are Catholics know what I'm talking about. These are just sort of forms of prayer. And in my 20s, I went the furthest away from that sense of connection. And interestingly, I got really deep into this addiction and attraction to the world of pleasure, money, drinking, drugs, all sorts of things that would provide pleasure. And this was the time when I'd turned my back on all of that and was distancing myself further and further and further. But interestingly, my life was getting more and more miserable,
Mm.
more and more riddled with sickness and suffering. And I think this is a good description of where the world's at. In the Kali, in Sanskrit, we talk about this as being Kali Yuga, the age of ignorance, where we ignore these connections, we ignore this relationship that we can have. But interestingly, it's in that darkness that it led me to start looking back again for the light. Sometimes we have to get to a real breaking point, and for me, that's definitely what happened. And they say it's darkest before dawn, and for me, that was definitely a prelude to something really quite beautiful and magnificent. And I think there was a deep connection that led me through that darkness from my Catholic upbringing, Catholic faith, to eventually find spirituality and meditation, Eastern philosophy, and bring those two worlds together. And it's a really exciting time. We've got some great work that was published. He's passed now, but Paramahansa Yogananda has some really great work talking about the resurrection of the Christ within, and how that there's a lot of reigniting of spiritual people reconnecting with Christ again. And I think what they're connecting with is the Christ consciousness. Of course, sometimes we can get lost in the actual person itself, which is the personification of the Christ consciousness that we all have within us. But I can see something happening quite interestingly as we start reconnecting with that now.
Absolutely. Would you be able to describe your definition of consciousness? I know this could be a little tricky sometimes, but
Yeah, I've always struggled with this one. It's even myself, after studying Eastern philosophy, meditation, spirituality, Vedic philosophy for 30 years. Consciousness is something hard to describe because there's so many degrees of it. We can have someone that's conscious or unconscious when they're on a football field and they've been knocked out. Even at nighttime, we go into an unconscious state when we go into deep sleep. In dream state, we're in a conscious state, but we're not awake. We're having dreams and we're at the center of all our dreams, but we're still asleep. And then you've got walking around in your day job or with the family or watching TV, you're still conscious. So consciousness is the degree to which you're aware, I believe. It's if I was to simplify it, it's the degree to which you're aware. What are you aware of? You're aware of the fundamental reality of life. When I say fundamental, it's a capital F, the absolute nature of life with a capital A, absolute reality with a capital R. And it's not a conditioned reality that you're seeing through the lens of your coding and constructs of your upbringing, your society. If you grew up under the Taliban in Afghanistan and didn't have access to the internet or went to university, you'd have a very different perspective of the world than if you grew up under a right-wing Christian family in Ohio. So what is reality? If it's just the thinking mind, it's a very deeply coded and influenced state of mind. So consciousness, when I talk about consciousness, if we look at pure consciousness that's not polluted with thoughts and social constructs and conditioning, then we start accessing this deep knower. In Sanskrit, we call it the Sangita. And the Sangita is the knower knowing the known. These are absolutes, the absolute of the knower, not Tom, the personality with the thinking mind, but a source of knowing deep truth. And then in the process of knowing, and in the process of knowing what is already known, which is all wisdom isn't something that we acquire or buy or get. You can't get it from a TikTok or a YouTube. You might find something that's wise and then nod your head at that because you already know it. Wisdom is innate. It's a field of intelligence that we're part of. It's like the wave being the ocean.
yes. So as you flipped through the yellow pages and you found the meditation place, what was your first introduction to it? Did you have a specific mentor that guided you through that?
Yeah, it's an interesting process. In the yellow pages, you could highlight your business in bright red to make it stand out more. And I remember it still clearly in my mind. It was like an impression left on my mind. There it was in bright red, transcendental meditation. So I rang them up and said, I want to learn now. When can I start? And they said, no, you can't do that. You have to come to an intro talk. No, I don't want to do that. Just sign me up. I'm going to come and meditate. They wouldn't let me do that. I had to go to the intro talk, and there was 20 people in the room. And this teacher came in, a man called Tom Knowles, and he was in a suit, and I wore suits. So I thought that's pretty cool. And he talked about the science of this technique, and he talked about how some insurance companies were offering premiums discounts if people use this technique in America because it was proven to reduce their ability to get sick. And there was all this incredible science, and it was just like everything he was saying was just like this incredible enlivening within me. And so I signed up and had a teacher called Tom Knowles who had studied under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he became a great guide for me in my life. And I learned the meditation technique with him the next week and continued on deeper and deeper into deep philosophy and advanced technique training over many, many years with him.
So, if you could describe like transcendental meditation, in briefly, you'd be able to do that.
Yeah, so it comes under a couple of different names. There was a bit of a split, and there's Transcendental Meditation, which is an organization. There's Vedic Meditation, which is just a technique. It is building quite a community around Vedic meditation, but they're very much similar techniques. You do a particular introduction to getting them. You get a mantra, which is a primordial vibration that you repeat. If you just try to empty the mind or clear the mind of thoughts, it's almost impossible to do that. And that's because the mind's natural tendency is to seek charm. And one of the greatest charming propositions for the mind is thinking. It loves to think. So we introduce this mantra, primordial resonance, that really takes the mind away from the external world of form and phenomenon and allures the mind inward to the subtle and subtlest field, which is the field beyond form and phenomenon, where silence and stillness exists. So you get your personal mantra through a little ceremony called a puja, and then you learn over 4 sessions. And I do this now as a teacher. I teach this technique all around the world in person and on Zoom. And what happens is that it really simplifies the process of meditation, and it's very formulated and structured in that we recommend 20 minutes, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, for optimal benefits and optimal experience. And each week you'll get a follow-up group meditation opportunity with the teacher and some guidance from that weekly session. So I do that on Zoom, and people can join that. I've been doing that for 10 years every week, where people can come and get their meditation practice supported with the community and their teacher as an ongoing support system.
How is the personal mantra chosen?
Yeah, it's a very simple process. It's based upon when they were born and when they came into the world as a human onto the planet. And it's based upon that. So there's certain age categories that we determine the mantra based upon on that. It's very simple. A bit like your horoscope and numerology, there's certain categories that you fit into. And so that's how the mantras get allocated.
Interesting. I always wondered that, but no.
Yeah, some teachers might give you a sort of fancy answer, but that's a pretty simple one.
Yeah. So, what changed in your life after you started meditating?
Yeah, it was chalk and cheese. I talk about my life PM and AM. PM before pre-meditation, and AM after meditation. And it was in the first week or two, the biggest shift was really being able to sleep. I had chronic insomnia, really, really severe insomnia. And the first week and two, I was just falling asleep everywhere and falling asleep in nanoseconds. It was really quite phenomenal, something I'd never experienced before. And I see that a lot with my students. The second thing was a lot of the anxiety and reactiveness to life, this like fear-based mentality of trepidation of life started to really pull back and ease off. And I started to feel lighter. I started to feel calmer. I started to feel more at ease with life, less trepidation. And then as time goes on and you go deeper and deeper into the experience and deeper into the understanding of it all and the knowledge, there was just this expanding of my mind, breaking free of a lot of the, I guess, constructs and conditioning of life around, chasing circumstances, controlling, not needing to control life so much, just being in flow more. And a lot of the craving for things like alcohol and drugs just dropped away very quickly as you start to find this natural arising and self-referring of an inner fulfillment that comes through just simply your body getting out of the sympathetic and into the parasympathetic nervous system state. And as we go from the stress response to the peace response, we start finding that the cortisol and adrenaline eases off, and the serotonin and oxytocin starts to increase. And that's really my greatest motivation for becoming a teacher and, playing as big as I like to play, because I can see that most people's problems, not all, but most people's problems can get resolved very quickly when we start to meditate and get out of the stress response in our body.
Yeah. Spirituality seems to be a bit trendy at the moment. And things like self-love and self-care are often thrown around. Can you talk a little bit about what self-love really is, and what that means in connection to your discovery through meditation?
Hmm. I see it's a trend. I wouldn't say it's trendy because it has a slight negative connotation. It's a trend in that it's a shifting of humanity. If we look at humanity over 10,000 year window of time, and what we're seeing is this incredible uplift in awakening and realization. And we're seeing people moving from objective, external, I want something to make me feel better, to, oh, this is something that I can cultivate and claim myself, which leads to self-love. And self-love is something that is a phrase that I like to tweak a little bit, because self-love means I need to love myself more. And there's two things in that. One is the I, which is the ego, and the other one is love. And I like to take it to the next level and say, let's just take the I out of the equation and let's just be love. Know that your true essence, beyond your thinking mind, beyond your emotional state, beyond your physical form, there's a quality to you. And it's part of the quality of consciousness. It's also part of the quality of Sakshikutashta, because that silent witness and consciousness itself has within it the essence of love. And so rather than I need to love myself more, you need to remove the thing that's wanting to love or needing to love yourself more, because that was the part of you that was also not loving you. But if you take that part of you away, what's left is just love. And so it's a whole jumping ahead of the curve and removing one piece of the process and just skipping to the end result, which is just be love. And that really simplifies things. And then everything that you do, the words that you speak, the actions that you take, all becomes a custodian and a representation of lovingness, gentle lovingness. Ram Dass used to call it loving awareness.
Yeah. What is your definition now of God compared to when you were a child to now, all of your experience with meditation? How do those two things connect?
This is going to be a bit confronting for some people to hear this. Um, when I was young, God was separate to me. And so there was me, and I would get on my knees at the end of my bed, and there would be a crucifix in my room, and there would be me asking this thing to make me better and to make my life better. Because if you do, then I'm going to feel better. And over time, in the transcending process of meditation, transcending the ego, the identity, the separated, segregated, individualized personality, and starting to become part of this unified field, and starting to realize that there is an omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent force. And if it's omnipresent, omni means all, it can't exclude me. And I had this interesting discussion with a man that was very religious, who subscribed to the idea of an omnipresent God. I said, do you believe in an omnipresent God? He said, absolutely, 100%. I said, then that must imply you. Oh, no, 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 that's not me. I'm not God. I said, but you subscribe to an omnipresent God. Yes, absolutely. I said, omnipresent must mean everything. And so the degree of our pain and suffering is the degree of how much we're not realizing that. And it takes a lot to, and a long time as well, to start to close the gap and clear the separation and start to claim our truth, which is that if God is the divine and the divine is omnipresent, that would mean that we are an extension and expression of God and have that level of power and brilliance and magnificence and lovingness as us. That is the essence of who we are, and we're in a process of realizing that. This is a long winding process of awakening to that truth, to getting to what we call self-realization. enlightenment of light, which is the essence of God.
Yes, and it seems like if you're in that state, that the manifestation piece that you were talking about coming easily to you as a child seems to like fit right in to attracting the things that you
Mm.
feel as you are
Yeah.
divine.
Yeah, I love Esther Hicks, who was channeling Abraham once. If anyone hasn't heard of Esther Hicks, look her up. And she works with Abraham, an ascended being. And she was saying, as Abraham, that the degree of suffering is the degree from which our lower self, which is our thoughts, feelings, and physicality, and our higher self, which is the divine quality, the gap between the two. And the more we close that gap, the closer we become, where our higher self and lower self become unified as one. Then that's when the suffering starts to obviously relieve itself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
So, as far as the work that you are doing now, where can people find you and have access to your work?
Yeah, couple places. They can go to my Instagram. I love the portal of Instagram. There's something really personal about it. You know, TikTok and YouTube. It's very hard to connect with people in those sort of places. They seem to have this impersonalized sort of quality about them. LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, but Instagram probably the most, for some reason, seems to be the most personalized sort of platform to connect with people. So I like hearing from people on Instagram, and that's where I'm pretty regular on a daily basis. And then my website where they can find all about my retreats and meditation courses and mentoring programs. So it's just Tom Cronin on Instagram, one word, and tomcronin.com for my website.
Excellent. So I'll add those so people can click on them easily. But because this is a platform for you and your story, is there anything on the top of your mind or your heart that you feel that's important to share?
You know, it's going to be the next couple of years, potentially challenging times, individually and collectively. We've seen some of that in the past as well. And we're going to see an acceleration of that to some degree because we're going through a massive shift as a species into that awakening, letting go of very old habits and patterns as individuals, one by one, start to realize their true nature. This is also going to challenge the powerful establishment that likes to have people in ignorance because that's much easier to control them. So there's going to be quite some interesting times ahead. But what's really important is that when we go through difficult times, and as bleak as it might seem, and as dark as it might be, it's never um, something ultimately that is the end of the story. It's part of a process, and that process is if we can have a deep sense of confidence and knowingness and trust, a deep trust that this process, whatever it is that we're going through, is leading us to something that is far, far greater. And it might not be materially greater, because that's obviously more often than not what our attachments are to. But usually it's an awakening to something deeper inside yourself that you didn't know existed before. And the best thing I can recommend is in those dark, deep times to go inward. And if you need some support in that process, find some mentors and guides to help you go inward, but to start asking questions about yourself. What am I missing? What am I forgetting? What am I here to discover that I have been distracted by the outer world?
Or even maybe even questioning your belief systems and how you
Mm,
came up with those in the first place.
yeah, yeah, great one. Yeah, I like that.
Could you talk a little bit about maybe what trust means and how you can achieve that?
Mm. Yeah, trust, it's a fine line, trust between I trust the process, and I trust the process because I know the process. I know the process, so therefore I trust the process. Trust is usually a byproduct of knowing. And it took me a long time because I was riddled with fear for many, many years. And there was this deep sense of trepidation and mistrust in the process. Mistrust leads to fear. And over time, it took me a long time to see these patterns and be able to see deeper into the mechanics of life and to trust that process and to go, okay, I know why this is happening and I can see why this is happening and I can see what I'm meant to do as a result of this happening. And therefore, I trust the process because I know that it's working for me and never working against me. But trust can also be misinterpreted as expectation. And sometimes we have expectations, which is different from trust. I expect this to happen. And therefore, if it doesn't happen, and it might be, I expect that person to behave this particular way. And that puts a huge sense of responsibility and obligation on the situation to work out for you to feel happy and fulfilled, which very rarely will it happen. So trusting the process because you see the mechanics of the process removes fear, but having expectations sometimes can be a cause for pain and suffering because it's very hard to have an expectation of something that it's a very rare possibility that's going to actually meet your expectation. I expect my work to provide me with ultimate fulfillment entirely the entire time. That's probably an erroneous expectation. I expect my partner to meet certain expectations to, provide me with a level of love and fulfillment that I would expect from them. That's probably misrepresentation of what's possible out of that because it then might not be able to meet that expectation because there are infallibilities and problems.
Yeah, it seems that having expectation also puts amount of control in the situation and doesn't leave room for open possibilities for
Yeah,
other things.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a tricky one. It's not black and white. It's a tough one to have a clear answer on, I think.
Yes. So, what about faith? How about that word?
Hmm. Faith, I think, is it's a human construct. Firstly, um,
Hmm.
faith doesn't exist beyond a human experience. Within the entire universe, before humans existed and after humans exist, um, and whether it's AI or some other intelligence, I don't think it will have a sense of faith. It's it's almost like goes in the same category as hope, and not that they're bad things, but they can be really beautiful things for the human experience. It's faith, trust, and hope. They kind of all fit almost within a very similar container. Um, it's a hard one to describe faith. I mean, of course, it's just, I believe and I have faith that it's going to work out, and I hope that it's going to work out, and I trust that it's going to work out, all those sorts of things. But I think if you just come back to just simple presence and just be in presence and just be here now, then we don't really need faith and we don't need hope. We just need to be present.
So, we'll throw in surrender in there too.
Yeah, surrender and presence go together because surrender leads you to presence, and presence is in part a process of surrender, which is that there's only one thing fundamentally happening, and nothing else is ever happening in any other moment other than what's happening in this moment. And if I'm purely conscious and like totally conscious and totally present, then the only thing is that this moment is happening. Now, of course, if I need to book an airline ticket for 3 weeks' time, when I'm booking the airline ticket, I'm doing that for a 3 week idea, but I'm still only present booking the airline ticket. It's very hard for the human to be present because their ego, which is the identity and the mind, is usually in the future or the past. But the fundamental reality is that there is only presence and there is nothing else but that, which is just this moment happening now. And those other constructs, which are human developments, um, don't necessarily need to come into play when we're just in presence.
Absolutely. And so, to bring trust back into it, um, would you say that we must learn to trust the process in order to be able to surrender?
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand as well. Yeah, for sure. There's a sort of like a relationship between the two. Hmm.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. So I have one last question that I usually ask to wrap up the conversation. And sometimes it can be a word or a sentence, or it can go off on another tangent, and either way is fine. If your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
Probably let go. It's so simple and yet so hard, I know. Uh, and it's something I struggle with a lot, which is, let go of control. let go of overthinking, even letting go of thinking, letting go of the need for life to work out for you, letting go of expectations, letting go of control. And what happens after letting go is simplicity. And life actually really is simple when we're just present. It really is uncomplicated when we're just present in this particular situation. And that requires letting go to get to that simplicity. And in that simplicity, where there's just the wind on my cheek, or the sound of your voice, or the reflection of light on the bedspread, or the smell of freshly cut grass on a summer's day, what happens is an arising of lovingness. In the simplicity, love arises. In the complexity, which is overthinking, over worrying, over regretting, we're distancing ourselves from our true nature, which is lovingness. So letting go leads to lovingness and simplicity.
Yeah. How would you place forgiveness within all of this?
That's a complex one, because it's, again, when we're present, there's two different ways to look at it. From a psychological, psychoanalytical level, forgiveness is an important part of healing. It's an important part of moving forward. It's an important part of bringing things back together. Whilst there's not forgiveness, then there's always going to be distance and conflict and disparity. So forgiveness can play a really important part. But if we come back to letting go, then we don't need forgiveness. And then what happens is we're able to see everything for what it is, and see that everyone's operating from a particular level of consciousness and conditioning and constructs that might not be serving them either. And I certainly am not perfect, and have certainly made many mistakes in my life. And we're operating from a very molded state that is influencing a lot of the way we do things. And so when we let go and we can see more clearly ourselves, but also others, we have a deep appreciation for why they're doing those things, and maybe we can support them in finding a better way to do things.
Yeah, I like to think that people are doing the best they can with what they have.
I've known people in family relationships that don't talk for like decades. It's like you're missing some golden years of being able to move it from a place of hate or guilt or shame or anger, which is a really low frequency. If you look at the love frequency chart, you'll see anger, hate, shame, and guilt, fear, really low frequencies, 20 to 50 hertz. And if you look at love and peace and enlightenment, which is 500 to 600 to 700 hertz, they're just so far apart. But if you want to get into high frequencies, which is to have a more profound experience in life, you can't be in that state of conflict and separation.
Yeah, I had a guest a while ago who said that love is all there is and everything else is just pinching it off. And I thought that was a really interesting way to say that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and sharing your story.
That's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along, and thanks for inspiring and creating a container for us to have these conversations. They're few and far between in our world, and people like you, by creating this container, enable us to have more of these conversations. And obviously that really supports other people by listening in. So thanks for that.
Really, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much, and until next time, stay tuned in to you.